As politicians in Greece campaign ahead of another parliamentary election on Sunday, the eurozone remains in crisis. Billions in aid have been promised to Spanish banks, but the financial markets are still nervous. European Commission President José Manuel Barroso has called on governments to press ahead with economic integration. Meanwhile, the Italian government has felt the need to deny that it too will need bailouts. Europe at the crossroads. Which way will Greece turn? Your host on today's show is Melinda Crane.
Hello and welcome. Has the Spanish bank rescue stopped the risk of contagion from the eurozone crisis, or has it created a new source of infection? Critics say that it could encourage other countries to think that they too can apply for help without meeting the onerous conditions imposed on some other bailout recipients. And what about that most worrisome of bailout recipients, Greece? Where is its latest election taking us? That's what we want to talk about today with our guests on Quadriga, three journalists and scholars who have been following events very closely. Ursula Weidenfeld covers the Eurozone crisis for several online news sites. She's held editorial positions with a number of Germany's leading business publications, and she's a recipient of the Ludwig Erhard Prize for Business Journalism. Quentin Peel is International Affairs Editor of the Financial Times. He has served as correspondent and bureau chief in Africa, Brussels, Moscow, and Germany. And George Mavrocordatos is a professor of modern Greek history and political sociology at the University of Athens and has also served as visiting professor in Austria and in the United States. So I'm going to ask you to be an oracle for us, if you would please, and tell us where you think your country is heading with the election on Sunday.
I have been wrong until very recently, so I cannot risk an oracle with any probability. I would say that it's still a toss of a coin, as far as we know, that it's very close. And essentially the two possibilities are either that New Democracy with Samaras as leader comes first, or that Syriza with Tsipras as leader comes first. Everything will flow from that, because whichever party comes first gets a stupid bonus of 50 seats. Yeah. And the way the Greek parliament of 300 will be structured, there can be no government without the first party.
Now, do you think that the Spanish bank rescue has encouraged Greek voters and or Greek politicians to think that they could get better terms, a better deal?
No. Because for those who are completely self-centered, it doesn't matter. I mean, they're not interested. And those who are not and who are informed realize that there is no comparison whatsoever.
Quentin Peel, the euphoria over the Spanish rescue was quite short-lived. Is it, in fact, dead in the water?
I don't think the deal is dead in the water. The euphoria, as you say, lasted about 1 hour, I think, before everybody suddenly thought, I'm not sure that this is going to solve the fundamental problem. I think that it's, for the time being, hopefully put the Spanish banking problem to one side, but it just made everybody then focus on the Spanish overall debt problem.
Hasn't it, in the end, simply shifted the debt and the risk from the banks to the government?
Yeah, I think it has, because the government is now responsible, if you like, for the debts of the banks, which is exactly the problem we had with Ireland. Ireland got into difficulties because it took all the banking debt problem on board, different to the problem that we have in Greece, which is a government debt problem, and where you have this extraordinary situation that a very large part of the electorate just seems to be in denial. And just to say, why the hell should we solve it?
Ursula Weidenfeld, some people said after this Spanish deal was agreed upon that it represented a climb down on the part of Germany, that by agreeing to more lax conditions for Spain, the Germans, in essence, had recognized that their austerity program is too harsh for Europe. Do you think that's right?
Well, I think they didn't recognize that their program is too harsh for Europe, but they had to recognize that the political climate in Europe is changing in terms of just having more left-centered parties in governments, having more thinking of a more lax regime on money should be the right way to go. But I think that's not the majority of German voters of the German thinking. Germans do think that austerity is the right thing to do, and they are quite thinking about what the Spanish thing would mean to them and mean to the austerity plans Germany has had for Europe.
The Chancellor has often said, look, I'm not only interested in savings and belt tightening, I'm interested in far-reaching structural reform. Is that not right?
Well, I think she is, and I think one way would be and has to be to combine the rescue plans you have to take right now with the strategy how to go on in the future and how to come to growth and to something like a stable economy which will go on without having action plans every month.
George Mavrocordatos, this is often portrayed as Germany against the southern European countries, the austerity, the puritanical, austerity-minded Germans against the rest. Do people in Greece see it that way?
A large part of the population wants to see it that way. It likes to see it that way. They are absolutely wrong about the facts, and they're wrong about the history of Greek-German relations after the war. There have been 60 years of fairly systematic rapprochement, cooperation, friendship, and so it is absurd that a large part of the Greeks simply forget all about it from one moment to the next and start blaming the Germans as if the war was still going on.
But I think there is some truth in it. I think there is some, you can see now that there is some cultural divide within Europe and that the southern European countries seem to be more likely to go for inflation or for something like a lax money regime, while the northern European countries seem to be more on the austerity plans and just think that it wouldn't be a good idea to go for inflation. And
I think we should look at our language sometimes too, because if you take the German words for debt and guilt, it's the same word. Yeah. Debt has a moral context.
But it has all over the world, as David Graeber shows us in his book.
Yes, it's most stark in German, I think. And the other word we've been using, austerity. Actually, in German, there is no word that sounds quite as drastic as austerity does in English or in French. And so I think that when Germans think about savings measures, this sounds like a very sensible and reasonable thing to do. When we talk about austerity, it sounds like a very drastic thing to do. So somehow it's quite deep in our psychology which way we go. And we do have very different cultures. And I think that in Germany in particular, because of German history of memories of hyperinflation and so on, it is very deep that you don't borrow money that you can't repay.
I think you're right, and I think, but there is another point in it, and this is that if you look, you do not have only make the southern countries of Europe agree to the rescue of the eurozone. You have to make the northern countries agree to them too. So if you look at the Netherlands, the Dutch have to go to elections in September, and they won't be right to agree to something like Greece or France now want from them.
George Mavrocordatos, may I just ask you a question, and perhaps you can add what you want to say. The German finance minister is telling us that from what he has seen, Greece has not met the conditions that were imposed on it by the so-called Troika. Are those conditions, these German-dictated conditions, at least to some extent?
They're not German-dictated conditions. This is a caricature of things. It is, it is good for propaganda, perhaps, but it is the wrong way of phrasing things. And the same with the cultural divide. I think the media has done a lot of damage, both from the Greek side and from the other side, because there is no comparison, for example, between Portugal and Greece. Portuguese culture and Greek culture. I happen to know Portugal a bit, and they are behaving as they are expected to behave by the rest of Europe. So to put them together with the Greeks is unfair to the Portuguese. It's not the same.
So you are planning to go home today?
Oh, I am. I am. That is, I think it's a mistake on the part of the Northerners to lump the Southerners together. Take Italy, for example. There are at least 2 or 3 Italys. You can't lump them all together. There is a hard-working northern Italy, and there's a southern Italy or Sicily, which is close to Greece in many ways. So it is unfair to simplify in such a way. And it is also, I think, politically dangerous because it fuels simplistic stereotypes. The Portuguese are hard-working people.
And the
Nobody
Greeks?
doubts that.
And the Greeks, Mr. Mavrocordatos?
Many of the Greeks. The Greeks actually are split. The Greek population is split between, I'm going to repeat what I said yesterday at the Adenauer Stiftung. Many Greeks are like Germans with respect to the values that most Germans value most. For example, people of an older generation refuse to owe any money anybody. And I'm still locked in that tradition myself. Like my grandfather, I don't like to owe money to anybody. There's a large part of the population who keeps to that principle. There is, unfortunately, another part of the population which I would qualify as infantile, in the sense that it does not like responsibility for its actions, for its expenses, for its lack of provision, and expects somebody, a big mother perhaps, to come in and help every time there is. Actually, there's a story from a German comic strip that I think illustrates that, from Vater und Sohn, if you know that. There's a story where the son acts as if he's a sleepwalker and has a big sign saying, "Sleepwalker, danger, don't wake up." So the father is blocked, and then he watches the son, who goes like this to the cupboard, climbs on it, and gets the pot with the marmalade, and then starts eating the marmalade, expecting that the father will do nothing. So with the Greeks today, we don't have a Vater und Sohn problem, we have a Mutter und Sohn problem.
Mother and son.
And the mother is Angela Merkel, isn't she?
Exactly, exactly. The Bundeskanzlerin is the mother who is portrayed as a bad mother.
But she likes to hang on to the marmalade.
No, she is not like mothers are supposed to be. Mothers are supposed to forgive and forget anything.
So let's ask Quentin Peel, will the Eurozone be prepared to forgive Greece if indeed it has not met the Troika's conditions? Theoretically, we're getting to the point where Greece could be required to leave the euro in one of 2 ways. Either the Greeks themselves could vote in such a way that remaining within the Eurozone becomes almost impossible, or the Troika could say, "I'm sorry, you have not met the conditions, you don't get more money." Would the EU be prepared to do that, do you think, or is this a mother who does, in the end, always forgive?
I think the message now is very much there is a limit, and therefore, dear Greek voters, do not risk this one, because there is a moment at which we may not carry on paying up. It was put to me quite well, I think, just in the last couple of days here in Berlin, when it was said, look, it's not as if Frau Merkel herself may say, I will do anything to save the euro, and she's very worried at the risk of Greece dropping out. But there may come a day within the Council in the European Union where they cannot reach agreement on carrying on to save Greece. So Greece will put itself in a position where it can't be saved, and then we could have a very messy default or situation where Greece drops out of the euro.
Indeed. In fact, we talk about a Lehman Brothers type tipping point if Greece were to leave the euro. Let's take a quick look at what that could mean.
What would happen if Greece were forced out of the euro? A new currency would be introduced, perhaps with the same name as the old one, the drachma. It would certainly lose value, some say by as much as 65%, stoking inflation and making life harder for the worse off. Greeks would surely take more money out of the banks, further contributing to financial instability. That could have a knock-on effect elsewhere around the continent. Greece owes tens of billions of euros to European lenders. If they're forced to write off that debt, banks would be less ready to provide credit. European leaders have built a firewall worth hundreds of billions of euros to stop the crisis spreading. But weakness is now being felt in countries like Spain and Italy, much bigger and more significant economies than Greece.
How well do people in Greece understand what an exit from the eurozone would mean? And is it right what we see in the report that for certain the most vulnerable in Greece would suffer very badly?
This is absolutely true. The problem is, number one, a generational problem. And I'm forced to go back to the infantile metaphor. The older generation, I think, is fairly realistic and well-informed. Number one, they have memories of what it used to be in the 50s, in the 60s, before the euro, after the euro, and so on. And it's not by chance that the older generation votes for the old parties. There's very much a generational gap in the electorate. Among the younger generation, who have been raised in a spirit of artificial affluence, who have been spoiled beyond belief by their parents and especially their mothers.
Back to the mother.
The Greek mother is notorious for spoiling the children, or one of the children.
The son.
The son.
The son.
Usually, usually the son, yeah. Or one of the sons. One of the sons. It was not me in my family.
Do you have children, by the way?
I do. I do have a son whom I raised with Vater und Sohn. As he was reading it in the toilet.
You didn't wake him up when he...
Okay, that's the German cartoon, but you wanted to go to the infantile. Yeah, let's
Sorry.
Stay on track here. Go on.
Okay. They are, number one, they are uninformed. They have, as a teacher of history, I know that they are almost completely ignorant of modern history, or any history for that matter. It's a failure of our educational system over the past 30 years. It's an abysmal failure. So they have no information, they have no picture of what it can be. And they are fed big lies. They are fed big lies
by Alexis Tsipras or by politicians in general?
Today, the Nobel Prize goes to Syriza, not Tsipras personally.
This is, of course, the new extreme left party that is looking.
On the spectrum, it's not extreme left. it is becoming center-left. It is absurd, but that's the way it is. So Tsipras is also a big liar. That is, he can... somebody said a few days previously that people with 20,000 euros a year were going to be forced to a compulsory loan. And Tsipras, a few days later, said he meant 20,000 a month, which was an obvious lie.
Okay.
But I wonder, I mean, you use the word lying, and it's a very strong word, but this ignorance of history is not just the exclusive problem of Greece.
No.
I think right across Europe,
that's true.
Our sense of history is shortening. And indeed, what's been created in Europe and the importance of what's been created in Europe, if you like, as a peace project rather than just an economic project, is being forgotten.
Absolutely. And
that's potentially very dangerous.
Well, I think it's not forgotten. It is not shared by the younger generation. Yeah. They just grew up in a situation where Europe was something what was there. No, it was
which they took for granted. But isn't that the reason, for instance, that we could and should have expected from Chancellor Merkel much stronger leadership much earlier on? Have we really heard her give the Europe speech that she needed to have given really right from the outset of this crisis?
Well, I think Angela Merkel is quite realistic, and she knows that she's not the person who delivers speech like a blood, sweat and tear thing to Europe. That's not her profession. She wouldn't be able to deliver that, and so she didn't. And I think she's a chancellor who is on a very day-to-day basis doing realistic things, doing things always not only looking what is possible for Europe, what is needed in Europe, but also what is being accepted in Germany, in the Netherlands and Finland, in the northern European countries.
But this has repeatedly been too little, too late. A piecemeal approach, always focused one crisis, one country, one step, and they always seem to be behind the wave.
But I think that's a general problem of democracies. You won't be able to do something like an economic model case in a democracy. You have every decision needs time, and a lot more time than it would be right for the financial markets. It always ends up in a compromise which nobody is really confident with. So we do have a problem in democracies to cope with the crisis we have.
So this is dangerous talk, I think.
Well, but
dangerous, but is it not realistic? I mean, we really have a problem dealing with financial crisis.
Is your Greek democracy up to the challenge it's facing?
No, but it's a special case. Let's not generalize from it. I can speak about it, but Ursula was generalizing.
But I think you have to accept that nobody would take democracies in question and say, well, we don't need it. But you have to accept that decisions need more time in democracies, and that they will be.
And therefore turn it round and say, yes, don't blame our leaders all the time for being too little, too late. They are actually almost by definition going to be. Mm-hmm. And one of the things about Angela Merkel, I think one of the qualities about Angela Merkel, is that she has, to a degree, raised her sights. And she has said the answer to this problem we have in the eurozone is not constant short-term sticking plaster. It's not what the markets want, a big bazooka, throw lots more money at it. No, it's get the fundamentals right. So we're going to have a much more ambitious programme of trying to have what she's again, even now this week, talked about political union. We really need political union in Europe. Have we time to get there? Is a very big question.
We know basically the outlines of what a comprehensive solution would need to include, don't we? Ursula Weidenfeld, take us through that briefly, if you would, please. What would be the elements that would need to be put in place quickly if we were to try to stop this contagion, as they call it, right now?
Well, I think to hope that there will be but one big solution would be... I think it's not realistic. We will have, we need more, we need a policy union, we need a fiscal union, and we need in the following of that, we can allow ourselves to have more solidarity in financial terms. So,
remind us of the elements, because not all of our viewers are, of course, completely up to date on this discussion the way so many are here. Take us through those elements step by step,
if you think of the political union, it would mean to deliver more rights of national parliaments to Europe, to have a more centered government in terms of taxes, in terms of economic questions, in terms of social questions. So, and this is a question whether European governments are ready to do that. And if you look at France, nobody can imagine that François Hollande will deliver these rights to Europe in the forthcoming.
So Europe will say, this is when people should retire, this age we'll all agree on, or this is how much we spend on social policy.
And what have we just seen at the moment? We've seen France lower the retirement age since François Hollande came into office.
The perspectives
There's 7 years difference between Germany and France just on retirement.
So the perspective for political union are quite... it's not very realistic that they will agree to these common decisions.
So just at the moment when we have a financial crisis which tends to make electorates instinctively say we want national solutions, actually the logical correct solution is more Europe. And that's the challenge,
and
whether we can make
majorities for that in their countries. Yeah. It is not only something a political leader has to agree with or to go for, but this would be decisions. Nearly every country in Europe has to have a referendum about that. So,
George Mavrocordatos, I must say I was rather discouraged to see just this week, at the same time that we're discussing the need for more Europe, that the countries themselves have said they want less Schengen. Also Schengen is, of course, the treaty that opened borders between European countries. The countries, not the Parliament. The Parliament is now in a dispute with the countries about this, but the member countries themselves are saying, we would like to take back some of the openness of borders. That doesn't make me feel very optimistic about the prospects of getting more European integration.
About the problem being discussed, I would emphasize the problem of leadership. There have been times when leaders inspired confidence also in markets. So it is a sort of lottery whether you will get the proper leader at the right time. It's everywhere the same, and the same, unfortunately, in Greece. So that's why I disagree that democracy, by definition, has problems with markets. Democracy can produce leaders who will inspire confidence in markets as they will inspire confidence in citizens. Germany has had such leaders. I would... who was speaking of Erhard? You got the Erhard Prize. Mm-hmm. So I think Erhard was inspiring absolute confidence in the markets of his day.
As economics minister, when he became chancellor, he was a failure.
Okay, fine. But it doesn't have to be the Bundeskanzlerin.
Yeah. Or look at Italy. I mean, it's a very good point you're making. That Mario Monti, who was, after all, elected by the Parliament, even if everybody says he's a technocrat, has dramatically improved the situation in comparison with Berlusconi. The trouble is the situation is so difficult that it's starting to wobble again.
Has he, though, really? I've seen several very critical articles saying that his big reforms, labour market and liberalisation, in fact, have fallen.
Well, but you look at he was appointed in November, and there was a very significant steadying of the sentiment. It's now started to wobble again because I think he's really hitting a lot of political resistance to the reforms that he needs to do. But I think that probably Mario Monti is the one man who knows what Italy needs. He knows it's not just a matter of reform and pain, it's also a matter of getting economic growth into the country. And that twin-track approach is actually, it has the potential to work. But the problems are very difficult.
Ursula Weidenfeld, I asked you about the elements of a possible solution, even if it's hard to get there. One thing that's often been proposed by Italy, among other countries, is bank insurance all across Europe. a truly united banking regime for Europe. Now, if I look at the experience in my own country after the economic crisis began, the TARP was one important element of getting U.S. banks stabilized, but deposit insurance was an equally important and often unsung hero of that moment. What are the prospects for a Europe-wide banking reform?
Well, I think it is needed, but the question is whether it would work in the current situation. And I think that at the moment we do have problems which seem to be in every country differently. So if you look at the Spanish banks, no banking system in Europe at the moment would be ready to step in there and to have something like a European guarantee for any banks in another country. So you have to solve the problems first and then go for something like a bigger union, which should be more than the national guarantees cover right now.
Or you have to have the regulations first before you can have the guarantees. And regulations that everybody's prepared to trust so that you won't get a situation where, let's be realistic, Germany will end up paying the guarantees for everybody else's banks when there's no responsibility in the banking system.
So I think one of the most important things is to make clear that there will be no check without conditions. And this is not only the problem of the northern European countries or Germany in particular, but it is a problem of negotiating all the issues we raised in this discussion. So you have to make clear there will be no checks without guarantees.
Giorgio Mavro,
if I may, as an ignoramus in banking matters, I have the impression that the central banks are already locked into the European Central Bank, and they are already tied to a set of regulations.
Yes, but that's not a discussion about the central banks, but on the banks.
But the central banks are monitoring, even in Greece, they are monitoring the private banks. So that is, our banking system is still working because we do have the old central bank, which is part of the European system, and it still does its job. So I would imagine, as a citizen,
the scale of the problem is completely different once you talk about banking deposits. We've been struggling in Europe to put together a firewall of 1 trillion euros. The size of the banking deposits in the whole eurozone is 11 trillion euros. You are talking about a huge amount of money.
This is the bank run issue, of course.
Of course, but you never have all the money that would be needed theoretically.
And the tragedy is once confidence goes, people do start to panic. I'm talking to my Irish sister-in-law who says, oh dear, should I get out of the euro and put all my money into Swiss francs? I said, well, how often do you leave the country and need a foreign currency? She said, once every couple of years. I said, then stay in euros, you're fine.
Well, I think
anyway, I'm sorry.
When you hear the debate here in Berlin, and when you hear Ursula Weidenfeld talk about the fact that the Germans simply don't want to write a blank check, is that something, do you understand the attitude here on the part of the Germans that say we are not willing to pay for other people to go on retirement at 60 when we work till 67?
I understand that absolutely, and as I said before, a large number of the Greeks agree with the Germans on this, feel the same way the Germans feel.
But they won't in a different way. On the elections,
No, I'm sorry. If you look at the electoral results, the irresponsible, let's say, parties did not get more than half. So if I may be allowed to imagine, let's say that there is half of Greece which is, let's say...
But half of Greece is half of Greece.
It is half of Greece, yes. But I mean, the other half one must not ignore and must not be unfair to. And I happen to belong to that one. And
isn't there a terrible dilemma, though, that the old responsible parties have actually proved to be incompetent and rather irresponsible over the years, and the new irresponsible parties are saying, we're going to clean up the house, but they've only got irresponsible policies to do it.
No, but I mean, you hear in Greece, let me simplify it, you hear in Greece very often that we overspend ourselves, we're spending money we didn't have, and so on and so forth. So this is a fairly common theme in Greek political discourse. Of course, the implications of it is simply that we must accept the memoranda and we must accept the restrictions, the conditions, and so on. And that's the practical conclusion from this sort of thinking. There's the other sort of thinking, as I called it, infantile, saying that, well, we don't owe really what we owe. If we leave, they are going to be... I mean, it is unfair to the Greek people of any age. It is unfair to simplify and generalize. As I said, I will repeat it, many Greeks agree absolutely with the Germans, and it's not new, because in Greece itself, for many years, some categories were getting retirement at 50 or 55, and others were getting at 65 or 67. So already in Greece there is a huge injustice between those who have been overspending the state budget and the others who have been spending less than their contributions. So have been getting less than their contributions. So that's the biggest problem in Greece today, and it's very difficult to translate it into political action if you're not a charismatic leader, which I'm not. A large part of the population is paying for the party that the other half of the population has been going on for years. And the root problem, which is completely different from the Portuguese or the Irish or the Italians, is that a large number of the Greek taxpayers don't pay taxes illegally.
Quite similar to Italy.
No, it's not the same in Italy. Okay. I mean, it's not the same
it's
volume.
The point that Madame Lagarde was making, very tough way. They're saying, you know, if you don't even pay your taxes, you've got to get to first base.
Yeah, but it's not everybody. It's a part.
Is it just the richest?
No, it's not just the richest. But without tax evasion, I mean, this is something that is not being mentioned. It is a very simple truth. Without tax evasion, Greece would not have a debt crisis.
Right. Let us now, we have just a few minutes left in the show. Let us look ahead briefly to the extent that we can. We started out asking for oracles, so we won't try that again. But accepting the fact that we may have a confusing result on Sunday, that it may take a while for negotiations in Greece, we have a big EU summit coming up, Ursula Weidenfeld. What would you expect that summit to produce? And is it going to happen too late? It's at the end of this month.
Well, it's always too late, but I think it is. It will lead us to the first steps to something like fiscal union. It will not meet all the expectations anyone could have and should have to the euro rescuer, to the euro system. But I think they will just go on in small steps. Everybody would expect them to do more, but that's our main and crucial problem, is that democracies do need more time, and they should take more time.
Quentin Peel, will the euro survive the summer in the form that it has now?
I think so, yes. I'm sticking my head on the line, but I believe the euro is a political project in every way, as much as more than an economic project. It is a fundamental political project. When Angela Merkel says, if the euro fails, Europe will fail, she means that. And she is going to do whatever it takes to save the euro. That may not mean keeping Greece in the euro if Greece basically votes against it. But it will mean keeping the euro together. And I think those in the markets who are convinced, and those among my own colleagues who seem to be convinced that the euro will fail in a matter of days or weeks, have just got it wrong.
George Mavrocordatos, do you see a realistic exit strategy for your country? Do you think it will be in the euro at the end of the summer?
Well, it very much depends on the outcome. If the Tsipras-Syriza party comes first, even without planning on their part or even without wishing it or wanting it, they will create such a mess of things that Greece will probably have to leave the eurozone. If New Democracy comes first, and if both its leaders and the leaders of PASOK and one more party at least get their act together quickly enough, I think they can realistically ask for some more time from our European partners and get the country back on track in a sort of long-term stabilization. That's the best one can hope for. It very much depends on whether the voters will act rationally, and very much depends on whether people who abstained in May will turn up this time. Some people, I find it amusing, some people are hoping that the younger generation will go swimming, and therefore...
Speaking of younger generation, very briefly, if you would, please, because we're almost out of time. You mentioned you have children. What are you telling them? Are you telling them to stay or go?
Well, I'm telling them, this is not going to be very nice, I'm telling them to study abroad, because as a servant of the Greek educational system, I know it is not working. And I will tell them to be well-equipped, well-qualified, well-educated, to come back when the right time comes.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for being with us today, and thanks to all of you out there for tuning in.